Good morning, good morning. Ooh, yeah, that's live. Good morning and welcome. We'll give folks just a few more seconds to get seated. Good morning. Thank you to all of you for being here this morning. We're excited to be here. My name is Ginny Castleberry, and very quickly I'm going to turn it over to our facilitator today, Albert Hernandez, and I'll tell you about him in a moment. I'm with the Innovation Lab at the Iliff School of Theology on the DU campus. Does anyone know where the DU campus is? Yeah, it's kind of prominent in Denver. Anyone know where Iliff is on the DU campus? Iliff, yes, okay. We've been there for about 130 years, along with DU. We used to be part of DU, but about 127 years ago, we went our separate ways, but they are still strong partners of ours, and we're right there. And we can talk a little more about what we are, but we're here today to talk about infusing authentic humanity into your growing organization. And this is not your grandma's panel. And by that I mean we care about being very interactive. We want to hear your stories. We want you to share with this group. And what you're going to find throughout the week, you'll see this at these sessions, people start coming in later. So this room is going to probably start filling up here over the next 10 minutes or so. But we wanted to be aware of your time. We may go a little bit over 11, so be ready for that. Couple of housekeeping things, and that is that you, by being here, you are willing to be recorded and might have your picture taken. And also there's a code of ethics around Denver Startup Week that we supposedly all have agreed to. So that's another thing that I'm supposed to disclose to you now. So go to the website if you're curious about what you agreed to there. But most importantly, at the beginning, we want to thank the sponsors. What keeps Denver Startup Week free is that we have sponsors. So a big shout out to all of those organizations that have made this happen, our title sponsors, especially Amazon at the very top, and then all of the ones who have helped make this stay a free and vibrant experience. And some more headline sponsors there. And then I'm going to leave it on that. You're going to hear from different people from very different organizations, so get those hashtags going for Denver Startup Week, for any of these organizations. We really appreciate your sharing this on social media. So, without further ado, I want to introduce you to Albert Hernandez. Albert is going to be moderating our panel. He's going to be introducing our panelists. And I'll also show later, I was flashing everyone's different bios. You can see these are some pretty awesome people. And they have deep backgrounds. They've done many things. Albert himself is a professor, a writer. He's been an executive leader. But what I think about when I think of Albert are discussions I've heard him give on medieval brewing and how that is tied to spirituality and feminism. Okay, so this guy knows about that. He also knows about healthcare and how our healthcare workers have been suffering with stress and with the ability to authentically engage with each other. So he runs the gamut of really fascinating subjects. So there's a lot more to this guy than just one bio. So with that, Albert, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ginny. And good morning and welcome. Thanks again for joining us for our Spotlight panel on infusing authentic humanity into your growing organization. So I'm going to introduce our panelists, then I'm going to ask the panelists some targeted questions, and then we'll turn it over to you, and we'll be asking you questions too. Dr. Philip Reed Butler is an international scholar whose work primarily focuses on the intersections of neuroscience, technology, spirituality, and Blackness. He uses the wisdom of these spaces to engage in a critical and constructive analysis of Black posthumanism, artificial intelligence, and pluriversal future realities. He is also the founder of the Seeker Project, a distinctly Black conversational artificial intelligence with mental health capacities. Philip has theorized artificial cognitive architectures for synthetic evolving life forms, acronym SELF, S-E-L, S-E-L-F, presented on emotionally regulating and spiritual experience-inducing brain-computer interfaces, and has constructed blockchain protocols and conceptual logistic infrastructures for a world leader in the industrial hemp space. Thank you, Philip. Reverend Amanda Henderson is the director of the Institute of Religion, Politics, and Culture. The IRPC is a combination of a think tank, an academic institution, an advocacy partner, offering resources through intentional research, consulting partnerships, educational opportunities, and creative content. She is the former executive director of the Interfaith Alliance of Colorado, where she was proud to have led the organization in growing impact, credibility, and financial sustainability. She is also an ordained minister in the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, and loves to preach and teach when she gets the chance. Thank you, Amanda, for joining us this day. Dr. Christina Lizardi-Hajbi is a research fellow at the Villanova School of Business and an assistant professor of leadership and formation, teaching leadership at the intersection of identity and spirituality at the Iliff School of Theology, where she is also the director of our Office of Professional Formation. She has consulted with religious organizations for over 2 decades. Her research and practical experiences center on community formation and change, intercultural and interfaith teaching and learning, and decolonial processes. As a progressively aligned minister and a trained facilitator with the Center for Renewal and Wholeness in Higher Education, Christina finds respite by spending time in the mountains and by watching trashy reality TV with her spouse Ali and guinea pig, Mr. Winston. Thank you, Christina, for joining us today. Dr. Wes Williams joined WellPower, formerly Mental Health Center of Denver, in 2007, and now serves as Vice President and Chief Information Officer. Wes was recognized for excellence in technology leadership with a 2020 Denver Business Journal C-Suite Award and the 2020 Colorado CIO of the Year Corporate Orbi. Wes is currently serving a second 3-year appointment by the governor to Colorado's eHealth Commission, representing behavioral health interests. Wes is a licensed psychologist in Colorado. To support his own well-being, he enjoys mountain biking, gravel biking, snowboarding, and coaching ultimate frisbee. Thank you, Wes, for joining us. Dr. Samantha Jew is the founder and CEO of Platform for Women, a nonprofit organization that is focused on mentoring youth and women for social activism. She is also the founder of Queer Koreans Alliance, which is now called Ding Dong, the first LGBTQIA+ youth crisis support center in Seoul, Korea. Currently, she is the Academic Advising Center Coordinator and Adjunct Faculty at Iliff School of Theology. When she is not developing programs at her nonprofit or advising students, she is exploring the outdoors with her 2 boys, Kimchi and Benji. Thank you, Samantha, for joining us. So our first question is for Christina. Authentic as a word sounds so perfect and so welcoming. What is a way, Christina, that the word authentic can be limiting?
That's a great question. So when I hear the word authentic, I kind of cringe a little bit. And I hear a lot of students in my line of work say they want to become their authentic selves. And I ask them, what does that actually mean to you? What are you talking about? Because I find that that word becomes a proxy for other kinds of things. So are they saying, do you want to become more aligned with your values in terms of your practice? Do you want to have more integrity between what you say and what you do? Or do you want to be more sincere in how you present yourself and more honest in how you present yourself? So I also think, and I like to challenge the notion of authenticity a little bit and the authentic self, because I don't know if there's some nougaty center that I have to dig to get to the bottom. And then when I find that, I can just live from that core and express that to the whole world. I actually think authenticity means that we use the whole of ourselves. We have many selves, our experiences, our identities, our locations, our backgrounds, and our relationships to form who we are as people. And so I like to add just a little bit more depth to that word and make people explain what they mean when they use that. So that's, I think, the way that it can be limiting, but I see that it has value for a lot of folks as well.
Thank you very much. Words matter. Our next question is for Sam. What is something entrepreneurial you've done in the last 6 months?
Well, basically, everything I've done in terms of my own projects have been entrepreneurial, whether it be setting up Ding Dong in Korea or setting up a platform for women in Colorado. But most recently, I think the most difficult step I took was actually in self-publication. I think as an academic, in terms of my background, I've always thought to basically legitimate my words, I would have to go through a publisher to be recognized, to have others recognize me and say, you are legitimate. But what I've discovered going through publishers was that they determine the price, they determine where they want to market the books, usually libraries, because they could get the most money. So what I've decided to do is self-publish a series of workbooks and guidebooks for women and youth through Amazon and through other platforms. And actually one is just recently published. And I'm a little anxious in terms of how it's going to be received because I haven't really started marketing yet. And so, but I feel like I could control in terms of the price because the academic books are $100 and over. And I did not want to sell that to my students because I thought it was unfair. But with this method, I found it to be more equitable, to be able to provide even free copies of my e-published books is something that I wanted to do. And so this is something I've done this year.
Thank you very much.
1995.
Our next question is for Philip. Philip, why should this audience care about an organization being authentically human?
Did you ask me this question? Ted's laughing because I think one of the things that I've been saying lately, and it's something I've kind of, I guess the space that I've been in is the idea that nobody's human. And so to be authentically human is kind of a counter thing. And so one of the things that I'm juxtaposing humanity versus personhood. And I say this mainly because when we think about a human, I think we kind of have one specific way of what it means to be a human. But when we look at people, it gives us a sense of complexity. And I think in terms of what it means for us to be authentic and what it means for us to maybe move into spaces where we give room for people to show up as they are, that requires us to be a bit more complex and to make products and to make rooms and to make spaces for the complexity of the whole person. And so in that regard, I'd say maybe not humanity in that space, but more for the people and for the person.
That is why I asked you the question. Thank you very much. And our next question is for Wes, and it's the same question we asked Sam. Wes, what is something entrepreneurial you've done in the last 6 months?
You know, I don't really think of myself as an entrepreneur, right? I work in a safety net behavioral health provider. We, help 21,000 people here in Denver every year who are struggling with mental illness and substance use disorders. My role as Chief Information Officer is really around looking at how can we leverage technology as a force multiplier to solve the access to care problem in behavioral health. Like, here's a little context for that. At any given time, out of every 25 people, 5 of them have a mental illness or substance use disorder. But of those 5, 3 don't receive any professional help at all for that problem, right? Meanwhile, right, the behavioral health workforce is shrinking, right? Like over the last decade, it's shrunk by about 10%, and for every one psychiatrist who enters the field, we have 2 leaving, right? And so I've been tasked with looking at, what are some of the possibilities for technology to help extend the reach of the workforce that we have, right? And in particular, looking at technologies like artificial intelligence to streamline some of the sort of not value-added tasks that our providers face so that they can focus on the people. Right?
Thank you, Wes. And your comments remind me that we are still living into the post-COVID world. And we speak, those of us who do research on current healthcare challenges and behavioral health challenges, speak about the pandemic within the pandemic. The major impact of COVID-19 may actually be the behavioral and mental health dimensions, which could be with us for a decade or more, as you know.
We absolutely have seen sort of an uptick in acuity of the folks that we're seeing, right? So it's not so much that we're seeing more people, because we're a provider, capacity limited provider, but the folks that we see are sicker and they're struggling in a way that is contributing to sort of workforce burnout, right? Like, so our therapists have sort of had it up to here. And I feel like it's really my role to figure out, like, how can I make their jobs easier so that they can do more with this sort of context of a mental health pandemic. Yeah.
Thank you again. And Amanda, why should this audience care about an organization being authentically human? Or you can do the entrepreneurial question.
I know. Okay, so I'm trying to decide which one. So I feel like the authentic and human have both been so deeply challenged. And so I guess in that, too, is constantly challenging our assumptions. And that will lead me to the segue into the entrepreneurial thing, is that we have recently started a podcast called Complexified. And so go to complexified.org, or anywhere that you listen to podcasts, you can find Complexified. And we are diving into the places where religion and politics collide with real life. And so for the Institute for Religion, Politics, and Culture, we are working to help people understand that religion and politics are not topics to be avoided, but topics that speak to our humanity and our fullness of our humanity, and the complexity of our humanity, and the complexity of trying to live together as people. And so that is both something that's entrepreneurial and a way that we are working to infuse that into our culture, and naming that we need more spaces where we are getting into the weeds of the messiness and the complexity of our full humanity, and our political spaces, which you all know we need to be talking about, and our religious spaces that we also need to be talking about.
Great, thank you very much. So now we turn it over to the audience. We want to hear from you. We want to ask you some questions as well. Here's a question for you. Have you ever quiet quit from an organization? Yes or no? No names, please. And why?
Everybody knows what quiet quitting is, right?
Show of hands. Have you ever quiet quit? Disengage. All
Yes,
right.
we've got some
A
honest.
few hands went up. Yeah, well, quiet quit is a term that has emerged more and more over the last 24 months. And basically, it's about employee disengagement, where you continue to work, but you exert very little effort, and your discretionary effort is exerted on your own well-being, and maybe even your time on the job market, seeking somewhere else to park your life and your career. and your humanity. Sorry, I'm going to use some of the terms that we're playing with today. I'm very critical of words, by the way, myself. Anyone? Questions, comments, reflections from the audience? You know, many of us are teachers, so we will call on you. Yes.
Oh, yeah, I guess this is the old one.
Oh, I wasn't sure what you were trying to communicate to me. Thank you.
Since I'm an entrepreneur, I don't really have the choice to quiet quit a lot, but I've had the privilege of working with a wide range of age groups and talents and mentalities and events. And for me, the disengagement, and I get where it comes from, is the unconnectedness, or something where I don't feel like maybe the owner or the business even has my best interest at heart. And what I'm loving about this panel, and what I'm kind of asking back, is for those of us, and there's a lot of us, reviewing what a benefits program looks like for employees. What does making a difference for our employees mean? What does the service motive over the profit motive mean? How do you make a difference in community? And how do you engage them? And so in our case, we had a Community Connect project, and anything that people wanted to do, and we're almost always we approved the expense, whether it was somebody with pets and animals or going to Habitat for Humanity and helping build a house or whatever it was. And we created quite engagement. I know a lot of people, our peers, have a problem keeping millennials or the younger groups, but we couldn't hardly get rid of them when we wanted to. So, you know, the idea is, how do we join the businesses who are having to completely re-engage working at home, policies, social structure, keeping employees? Does the benefit always have to be with catastrophic health? Or can you start looking at things earlier? What's people's mindset? How do they feel connected? The statistics from some of our public workers are the mortality rate is going way up with the younger people because there's not a physical support group. So, you know, how do we engage with you all on the conversations that you're having and reduce that, whatever that that quiet quit thing?
Thank you so much for raising those issues and questions. Panelists, any responses?
I think about this a lot because I work with students who are discerning their own vocation and how their own identities and who they are align with the work that they want to do in the world. And for me, it's about, and I think this is why authentic humanity and the humanity question, recognizing the fullness of who we are
Okay,
as
and then
beings
what about
is
audience
so important,
questions?
is simply asking the question, what will make this place a place where you can thrive? What are you good at, and how can we have you, or how can we utilize your strengths and your gifts and what gives you joy in your work, and to do that well? And I've actually done that with teams. In a former life, I took over another team and restructured it and
Others on the panel? Oh, excuse me. No, we are switching mics. No, you didn't do anything wrong. No
Okay,
problem.
good. Phew. So now what was I going to say? I just got completely distracted.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. Noticing, that the culture that we're developing within our organization or within our team is contagious. And so, like, always having that in mind to me as a leader and the way that I'm leading in a space and reminding, like, how we interact together is how we want the world to be. And so often I've found in organizations, especially mission-driven organizations, sometimes there's like this big disconnect between what you're saying out in the world about who you are and what you believe in, and then what it's like in the lived experience in a small group or a team, or the way people treat one another. And so just that continual reminder that what we're creating here, whether it's with a one-on-one meeting or a team of 5, or the entire organization, should be a microcosm of what we are hoping to create out in the world. So I think that cognizance to me makes me want to be a part of something like that has that integrity to the way that we hope for the world.
Thank you. Anyone else on the panel want to address that?
I just want to say that in the nonprofit world, there's this tendency to become having a savior complex where I go and save people. The key is not individualism or communalism, but it is community, where it's a we. I plus you equals a we. And so therefore, if I honor myself, you're honoring the community, you're honoring the we. And I think a lot of the times in nonprofit, we tend to not pay attention to the I. It's always about you and the other. But you cannot take oneself out of the equation. The moment you do that, it's about communalism, and it's not. You can't have the community without me. And I think that's very important to remember.
Thank you. So we actually have a program that we created at iLive about a decade ago, and it's called Authentic Engagement. And one of the principles of authentic engagement is me plus you equals we equals authentic engagement. Just thought I'd add that to the response. We have a crisis on the planet. It's a crisis of disengagement. It's a crisis of a lack of integration, of fragmentation even. And a lot of it is in the wake of the pandemic, and a lot of it is in the wake of all sorts of other stressors and challenges that were there before the pandemic and have been exacerbated by the pandemic. And whether you're an entrepreneur with a company of one or a small workforce, or whether you're part of a larger organization, human capital matters. People matter. You know, employees can exert discretionary effort to the degree that they feel their employer or the business model cares about the people dimension, the human dimension. And you can insert other terms in there if you don't like my use of the word people or my use of the word human. But I think you get the picture of what we're talking about. Maybe it's one of the reasons that some of you have become entrepreneurs. You got tired of working for a particular company. This is the mic for the audience. Other questions, comments, please? The floor is yours.
Hi, excuse me. So I'm wondering if you guys could speak a little bit to swinging too far the other way on the pendulum. I feel like I'm an entrepreneur. I have a team of like 30 people or so in Nicaragua, and then building a team in Chicago now. And I've really approached leadership from a very empathetic place, and sometimes I feel like
Thank you very much for that question. Panelists?
So I think it takes an examination of like what assumptions you were making previously, right? I would say, so in the before times, most of my team was in the office, at least 4 days a week, if not 5, right? And there was sort of an expectation that the way we collaborated together was by sort of being together, and we were leveraging the sort of collisions that occur at sort of a common workplace, right? And that's how you would develop cohesion as a team, right? Now my team is almost entirely telecommuting, right? We get together once a month for sort of an in-person strategy session, and the rest of the time everyone's remote. And one of the assumptions I think we made was in order to get work done, we all needed to work sort of 8 to 5, right? And yet there are folks on my team who have young kids, right? And there's really no reason why they can't drop their kids off from school, pick them up from school, like have that enter into the workspace, and they can choose when they do their work, right? We put some structures in place to make sure the team is functioning, but then we can let people live the rest of their lives, right? But I think that's in the context of a framework where we also have work product that we're working on, right? And we have a broad project management plan, and I think my experience has been the sort of telecommuting and working virtually can lead sort of in the other way around, like if you're not intentional, it's sort of all business, and you meetings start on time, which I love, like they end on time, which I also love, like and yet if you don't watch yourself, all you're talking about is like, what'd you work on yesterday, what do you work on today, who needs any support, and you move along, and you don't have that connection. So we've been in building this culture, I think we've built an intention of like, how do we replace those collisions with things like meeting openers, and other ways of sort of getting to know each other, in sort of appropriate context. So I think you're onto it, right, around the boundary setting and expectations, but some of the sort of myths I think we told ourselves about like what it meant to be a productive worker, I think those have fallen by the wayside.
Thank you, Wes. Christina? And then we'll take another question from the audience.
Yeah, so this is where I think the word authenticity gets us into trouble. So if I wanted to be my full authentic self and just bring everything into my workspace and just do whatever I want and function out of my place, I'd show up to work naked. I just do everything that I wanted to do, right? Like, and that's not really what authenticity is. And this comes up so much in religious organizations, you wouldn't believe. People are like, oh, we love each other here. We're a family. I actually have done research that shows when people say we are like a family, it's actually a negative factor for productivity and vitality in religious institutions because it becomes insular and dysfunctional. And so you're describing some of that stuff. And so what I say to people in those religious institutions is all people are welcome, not all behaviors are welcome. And you have to sort of begin to set some limits about what behaviors are helpful and what behaviors are not, and what the limits of authenticity, quote unquote, are. So people can show up who they are and be valued and respected for who they are in their work, but at the end of the day, you're working toward a shared goal, and if those things aren't met, and if there aren't those values and assumptions in place and expectations for how you do the work together, then that can cause problems. And of course, there are always exceptions. Somebody's car breaks down, somebody has some family problems, and you make allowances for that. But if at the end of the day, the work is not getting done, then that's a different kind of conversation. So it is a balance of being empathetic, but also saying, I need to think of the needs of the whole and what are the needs and what are the goals of the whole here.
And just really quickly, I think this also talks about kind of the EAP program that you had set up, mentioned in the previous question, in terms of like what type of what kind of person is on staff that may be able to help them process what they're going through in that moment that might allow for them to get back into the game, so to speak, right? Like we may all kind of like hate, Jenny from Billions because she's super, ambitious and is willing to cut people to the side. But she serves a really, really powerful role, right, in the middle of that hedge fund. Like she allows for people to get things out, and also kind of grounds them, and then helps them with their performance as well. And so I'm curious about the ways that either you were able to hold that space for them and help them process in order to get them back on track, or have somebody else, a part of the team, that might be able to serve that capacity.
Thank you. We have a question in the back. Thank you.
Thanks.
Go ahead.
We'll try to avoid the watchwords here, but in doing this topic area, there's always a lot of focus on building the right culture.
Thank you. Panelists?
Sure, I'll start with my stuff, right? So I founded Seeker. It's a conversational artificial intelligence. It's trained in about 3 different modalities. It's kind of like a pocket therapist, right? You can go in about 3 to 7 minutes and have a start to finish conversation to help you process what you're feeling, what is going on inside your body, where you located at, and then what's kind of what is this emotion saying, like as opposed to like the initial like I hate everybody versus really I just need some space, right? And so it's being able to get from one point to another from your inside, and knowing that you already have the answers and you're the one that has to return back to work anyways, right? And so kind of thinking about this is potentially as a productivity tool, right? How do you help people process what they're witnessing in the moment, what they're experiencing, and then kind of guide them back into real life? So that's one particular space you could probably kind of call on.
I know. Does anybody have anything that?
I attended an interesting session yesterday. Answer came to my mind, and I later talked to him about it, was that he had to aspire to his higher self to be the best CEO that he could. And so I approached him afterwards and I said, well, what you're really talking about is setting the highest goal of your company is that people express and expand their potential to be a loving human being. And when will the conversation of love come into the conversation of how you build a good culture and a good business? Because I'm all about love, but I haven't heard a single speaker this week or any startups in the past talk about love. And so could this be Mufa's answer of how you build a framework where people are really showing up with their best intention of being the best that they can, of supporting each other and being loving inside of their own life, and creating an organization that's product, whatever it is, actually has that impact of making the world a more loving place?
Oh, I'm so glad I have the mic. I love this question. I use the word love. I recently heard a definition of love that I just have been holding on to. So love is the non-possessive delight in the particularity of the other. the non-possessive delight in the particularity of the other. And thinking about what that looks like in the workplace is that it does transform like this constant, like I need to own something. It changes the power struggle or the ego struggle because you're letting go of possession. And you are like looking for the delight in the other. Like what is, I don't know what I'm doing with this mic, I'm sorry. Okay, the delight in the other person. And to me, that also taps into that's messy. It's not like delight isn't always like I'm looking for what is perfect by this standard in you. I'm looking to the things that are curious and interesting and fun and different, not how do you fit this mold and standard to. Yeah, but it's the inclusivity to me can, it's become any word that gets overused starts to lose its meaning, right? And to me, I love the word delight and curiosity and creativity and imagination and fun. So the more that you're looking for other people in that way, and that to me is fostering love within an organization and within whatever you are bringing to the world.
Hey, so I have a much more concrete answer, right, that I was thinking about for that question. And, some of the challenges, right, I work for a healthcare organization, and yet my employees do not provide healthcare, right? So there are two things that I would recommend there, right? One is when you talk about the work that your team is doing, right, as a leader, you make it tangible, right? So if someone does something that saves us $50,000, right? I don't talk about like, oh, that's $50,000. It's, whatever percent of our budget, right? I talk about it like that's the salary of a case manager that has a caseload of 30 people experiencing homelessness, helping them find housing and shelter so that they are capable of focusing on their mental health and well-being, right? And you make those tangible connections, right? And actually, I've taken this, so every month I talk about a different service line at our organization and the why behind what they do the work, and then I acknowledge specific team members that have contributed in the back end, like, these help desk staff go out and fix the computers and make sure that the residential facilities are safe and secure. These staff do program evaluation to show the effectiveness. These staff provide sort of application support. And I think like you can't be too generous with sort of acknowledgments when people have contributed, right? And as a leader, you don't have to take the credit for yourself. Like, it's your team. It's subtext anyway.
I know, right?
I think you need to have self-worth or self-love in order to be an effective, impactful leader. An impactful leader who does not need to prove, does not need to perform, does not need to have their ego stroked, are able to develop strong relationships with the community, with their workers, with the organization. And it starts from there. Without that, I don't care how effective you are, it's not going to last. And that's where it starts, is the self-love part. Love of community as well.
And to add to that, right, I think part of what we're attempting to do in terms of fostering a particular type of community is to teach the folks within our community how to love themselves as well. This is not like, hey, you need to take 5 hours off and go do a boat ride or something, or like I'm just leaving today. It's the how do I become aware of what just happened, right, in this meeting, if I was overlooked or, if somebody said something that was disrespectful to me, how do I navigate that? And then also, as a leader, how do you navigate that? But how do we create that space where it's more of a U-turn? And by a U-turn, it's mean like something happened, I can take account of it. I can become aware of it. I'm now able to process that and return back to the space after being able to navigate my own kind of internality in that way. And so what does it mean when the culture is one of self-reflection? And that, I think that allows for people to be better when they come back together again.
And I'll just add to what everyone has said is that I think love is honoring and recognizing people for who they are and what they bring to the organization, not who they aren't and what they don't bring. And I think so much of leadership is to shed our own sort of bars that we set up in our own mind of who people should be and what they should do, and meet people where they are at. That doesn't mean that the work doesn't get done, but it means that we rely on people because of who they are and because of their strengths. So I walk into any room with any team, and I assume that just because I'm the positional leader, that I don't have all the knowledge and wisdom in order to complete any task, because I know I don't. And only together can we come up with solutions and ways to do things that will actually help any organization. And so I really rely on the people that I work with to, and I say this to the people I work with, like, you are actually the other missing parts of my brain, because they are. They just are. And if we function in that way, I think that is a kind of love where we honor what people actually do bring, not just use people to do a task and make products.
Ditto on every single word that you just heard. I cannot praise those responses enough. If you want to, again, the historian's going to chime in a little bit here. If you want to look further into that, look up, and all of you, look up the words human flourishing, and it'll lead you to all sorts of resources and traditions that echo every single key word that you heard from our panelists. It'll lead you to words like love and joy and values congruence. You know, how do you narrow the gap between an organization, what an organization claims that it is on its lofty mission statements, and what actually goes on there day to day? The gap between those two things can be crushing for a human being, for any person. It's one of the reasons that probably people quit. It's one of the reasons why probably some organizations get derailed and off track, because the values and what's really going on there day to day are just not in alignment. But human flourishing is a word that has a huge history in organizational development, in leadership materials, in the Harvard Business Review, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's almost always translated as the word happiness, but that doesn't quite get at what the tradition is really trying to say. A lot of what it's really trying to say is about love. And love is ultimately about connectedness among human beings. So I'll stop there before I go into philosophical essay. We have another question. And just to give the audience and our panelists a heads up, we're at 11. We can go over by a few minutes, but I do want to be mindful of our time. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And I'll keep this short due to time. But one thing I'd like you guys to elaborate on, even if it's just quick, is the dichotomy between team goals and organizational goals. For me, I work in the tech sphere, and my boss tries. He actually is fairly good at the empathy, the humanistic perspective. I do think that there are a lot of really bad leaders out there, and I do think that, unfortunately, business structure dictates that as you move up, you then manage people, regardless if you have the training or the education or the empathy to do so. So for me personally, I think he tries and he's pretty good, you know, whatever. But the big problem that I feel is that my team, as it sits in our organization, does not get the buy-in or the support from business leaders or field techs. So right now, I'm having a bit of a support identity crisis, because all of the work that I do and I'm very passionate about and trying to push the needle on, my team might recognize it, but the people who make decisions don't. And that is a really tough place to be, where you are putting a lot of effort into something that the business leaders do not care about.
Do you have anything?
Panelists?
Yeah, so I think, you know, I've been at so I've been at WellPower for 14 years, and I've seen us do it both ways, right? Where we have like a strategic plan that's like a laundry list of like, okay, we have 5 pages of initiatives that we're trying to do, and everyone's included. And it's really hard then to understand like what are the priorities and the focal points, right? Other years we've done it what I think of as better, but it brings in some complexities that I think you're raising here, right? So if you talk about like, we have 3 strategic initiatives. These initiatives are the most important initiatives. It definitely, inevitably, leaves people whose jobs only tangentially touch those 3 initiatives. And I think they're left asking the question like, what is the relevance of my work? Like, how do I fit into this picture? And that is where I think you need to be really intentional around how does it tie in, as well as, you know, how does this work, even if it isn't tied into, for example, one of the top 3 initiatives this year, fit into the vision of the company more broadly, right? And as a leader, you need to articulate that to folks so that they can take meaning in the way that they do the work, right? And I think as a technology leader, I do very similar stuff, right? It's like the cybersecurity assessment remediation work is a few steps away from, you know, delivering healthcare to people, and yet when you can talk about, for example, being stewards of people's most private information so that they have the courage to come get the help that they need, right? Like, that's what you're talking about, right? And I think sometimes it's an easier leap than others.
I just want to acknowledge that one of the things it sounds like you said was, how do you, as someone who's kind of within that structure, where is your power to be able to change that system? And so I wonder about, you know, finding the places where you can develop that human connection with someone who has the power, that you can ask those questions of how does my role and my team fit in the higher piece, or, you know, to be able to engage in a system that is broken, i.e. human. Then where do you find those places where you can actually make a difference and break through? That would be my advice. Find the spot.
Yeah, and this is such a tension I've felt for so long too. I've been a middle manager in every religious and nonprofit organization I've been in. And it's managing up and managing down. And you really are the pin that is holding those 2 pieces together. And it creates an incredible strain on you more than it does even the people that work under you in your team, or the people that work above you, certainly. And I would just ask the question, beyond what others have said, is how are you caring for yourself in that space? Because that is a difficult space to be in, and it's not one that gets resolved easily. But as people who are doing that kind of in-between work, besides the technical solutions, it's how do you maintain that work and hold those tensions well so that you're not burning out or harming yourself.
Thank you very much. We are at 6 minutes past the top of the hour. I want to honor your time because we're aware that some of you may be on your way to other sessions. We'll be here for a little bit if you have one-on-one questions you want to ask of us. Thank you so much for joining us. Ginny, any closing words or thoughts from you? No, you did it. Okay. All right. Well, then, thank you very much. All the best.